Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. I want to talk VR, and this is kind of a video response. Mateo311, just at the beginning of the month, did a video about the problem with VR, just games in general. Now, he's a big YouTuber who does a lot of VR stuff, and he is by no means bashing what's going on in the industry, but he had a perspective that I thought was very valid, totally right, but he was missing one critical element to the VR conversation, and I actually yelled it out loud watching his video, and I thought, no, don't yell at the TV. Make a video response. That's what I'm doing here. This is, in Mateo's video, he's talking about how here we are well into the VR space. How come we don't still have good games? Like, how come it's still meh? How come it's still a lot of like tech demo stuff or one-trick ponies, he calls, you know, things like Beat Saber, great game, does very well, it's a very successful VR title, but in his mind, that Pistol Whip, other stuff, they're kind of a one-trick pony. They do one thing really well, but is this a AAA game? Not entirely, no. Where are the Red Dead Redemptions or the Assassin's Creeds? I think there is an Assassin's Creed game coming to VR, but generally speaking, his point was we're not getting those big AAA titles. Why not? And it's not like it's a hardware issue, and he's very right on that. I am aware that, like, sure, with PSVR 1 and everything from, 5-6 years ago, it was a bit of a slog to get a big AAA experience on something that's kind of chugging along, as we should say. And now, with PSVR 2 and Quest 3 and all the other, what's that really wide one, Pico something? And even Apple's getting into VR. Where are the big titles? Where are those huge AAA experiences? Yes, with PSVR 2, you did get Call of the Mountain, you got Gran Turismo, which is an add-on to an existing game, so does that count? Then Formula 1 was launched or announced, and it doesn't have PSVR 2 support. There's now WRC Racing has been announced. I doubt that's going to have any VR support. So, like, why is there this lag? Why are we dropping off 6 months later after specifically PSVR 2's release? Why is it not happening? Now, I don't have PSVR 2 yet. I've been watching closely because I love PSVR 1. I play the heck out of this thing. And other than, 5 or 6 sure titles, it doesn't yet grab me. I'm waiting for something to really pull me in, to make me want to ditch this one and get the new one. I don't think it's going to happen, to be perfectly honest. We're 6 months in. It took about a year for this thing to grab my attention, but I don't think it's going to happen. So, with that in mind, I was reminded of something that was said many years ago that just made me think, well, there's your reason. There's the problem. And Mateo didn't mention it, and I thought, I'm going to do a little video response to bring it up. This is something that was actually echoed when PSVR 2 was announced. Again, I'm leaning into PSVR 2 for this conversation because it's the only one I would get if I'm going to get it, because I love this thing. And it has good hardware. Like, again, Mateo talked about, sure, you could argue in the past it wasn't possible to port really good games to VR, but you can with PSVR 2. It has a lot of horsepower under the hood. It's got a million features. Those controllers are great. There's no reason now that PSVR 2 shouldn't be getting a lot more support. And I was reminded, I listened to some of the podcasts from IGN I've mentioned before, and their big one is Game Scoop, hosted by David Hatfield. And he is probably a good representative of somebody who's got their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the gaming world, all different makes and models. Like, he's big into handhelds, he's big into AAA titles, he's huge on indie games. I think Hearthstone is one of his favorites of all time, and that's a little mobile game where, you can play on your computer. He is probably, to me, a very good yardstick litmus test thermometer of the enthusiasm the real big gaming industry or market would have for something. If a new kind of technology came along and Damon Hatfield was like, yeah, it would probably be a good reflection of how much the industry wants that. He goes to all the big events. He's got a huge podcast. I mean, I don't need to boost his ego anymore. He is a big name when it comes to conversations about video gaming. And when PSVR 2 was about to come out back in February, his podcast, Game Scoop, did nothing but basically pee all over it before it even came out. And they weren't like harsh with their criticism, but all the guys on the show, I believe the line they said something was, can you believe Sony are about to throw way more money at yet another piece of hardware that we know is going to fail? And this was before it even came out. I was like, guys, you don't know yet. How do you have the foresight to be able to make a prediction like that? And it's not like they were right, but it was the fact that that was their point of view, that was their perspective, made me sit back and go, so if you guys are not convinced, what the heck does the average game creator, what is the average developer going to look at with this audience, this VR crowd? If they're going to go, well, the mainstream, what do you want to call it? The mainstream media, if gaming media doesn't give a rat's ass about VR, why are we even bothering? And that's kind of come true. And Damon Hatfield himself, when PSVR 1 came out, he immediately didn't like it for one specific reason, and this is what the thumbnail or the discussion for me is all about. This was all predicted years ago, and weirdly, it's to do with the Vectrex of all things. So, one of the great Vectrex YouTubers, VectrexRoli, years ago, I want to say 6-7 years ago, he was doing a thing about the 3D imager, which you put on your head, much like this, and it's got a spinning disc and it makes color appear. I mean, and you do a YouTube search for the 3D imager for the Vectrex. I've got a solution like that myself, and I haven't actually got into it, but the Vectrex had a way to make 3D imagery work by putting a helmet on. And VectrexRoli went into a nice little deep dive about it. Roland, I couldn't find the video. I don't know if you took it down or if I'm remembering it wrong. Please let me know if you see this. Where's that video? Because I remember you talking about the 3D imager. And more specifically, you mentioned how there are people who have stigmatisms in their eyes. Like if your eyes are slightly different from the majority of people, a thing on your eyes is going to bother you. It's going to be a headache. In fact, you mentioned those microscopes that have got like the stereo microscope thing. That was your example. And I remember when I was watching you, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I have no problem going to a 3D movie. I have no problem with VR. I have no problem with the 3D imager for this. But maybe there are people like Damon Hatfield who are sitting there, and Damon Hatfield has confirmed this. He says he hates going to 3D movies because of this thing. It bothers his eyes. That's gonna kill any interest anybody has in putting one of these on them or going to anything that requires goggles or something on your eyes. Hence, VR is in trouble with that portion of the population. I don't know how big that is, but in addition to not selling for people like that, it means that there's going to be a big chunk of the population that are going to listen to Damon Hatfield and go, yeah, it's garbage. I'm not going for it. So flat screen gaming will probably live forever, and VR is never going to get close to it. Now, Matteo does do some good stuff, talking about how we're in this weird chicken and the egg, and these are all valid points, of nobody's going to buy a headset and invest all that cash if there aren't any good games for it. Game makers are going to go, well, we're not going to make a good game if nobody's got the headset. And so you're in this cycle, this vicious cycle. Matteo talks about that. And he also goes into a lot of great detail. I'll put a link down below to his video. It's very good, very balanced, very fair. I think his one element of the conversation that he didn't mention, so I just wanted to bring it up. There are people who will never like putting on goggles or having anything on their eyes. Just like VectrexRoli said back in the day. So it's not going to happen for them. Therefore, you've got a big chunk of the population that's never going to get into this stuff. And that means probably VR is flawed and maybe can't get out of it. Maybe it's cursed. I don't know. Anyway, just thought I'd give a little quick video about that. And with the Vectrex reference, it works out very well. Will I get PSVR 2? I'm waiting for some reason to do so. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe that'll change. All right. Until next time, we'll see you down the rabbit hole.